Might notice the new brick and mortar activity going on outside. It's the first time in 130 years that this building has been spruced up in the way it is now. We've gained some reinforcing rods to help with overcome the effects of gravity over the past century. And we're delighted to have some family farms here in Jefferson County that go back farther than this building. And we're going to be learning from the Worley family tonight about their farm going all the way back, even farther than I thought. And I'd like to have them introduce themselves by name. We'll start at this end.
I'm Larry Worley.
Thank you.
I'm Jane Worley Knapp, his sister.
And
Marcia Garland. Marcia Worley Garland.
thank you. Thanks, Marcia. And I'm Lawrance Eyre. I work here at Carnegie Museum. We're delighted. This is actually the 15th month in a row that we've been able to have a family farm event of this kind. We're not here to have a scripted story, but we hope to hear some stories about what life was like for many generations, going all the way back, that you'll tell us.
Well, the Charlton family owned the farm starting in 1885, and the descendancy from that family line, but actually it started in 1857 because John Charlton's sister, Margaret Charlton Garmo, and her husband, Jacob, owned the land in 1857, and when he died in 1885, his widow sold it to her brother John Charlton. And so through the Charlton family, it then went to his son, Scott Charlton, and his wife, Lena Workman, and then to their daughter, Florence Charlton, who married Roy Worley. And so at that point, it became the Worley farm. And then our father, Arthur Worley, and now my brother, Larry Worley. So that's been the family succession for the farm.
And where's the farm located for those who are watching?
Northeast of Fairfield.
Buchanan Township?
Yeah, Buchanan Township.
So as a crow flies, how far from this building would you get?
About 6 miles.
Okay. And for the people who'd like to know what has been grown there or what livestock has been raised there, if you can give us a little background.
Right now there's cattle. We feed out all our calves, so we have fat cattle to sell.
And how many acres overall?
There's 200 acres.
And timber of any kind anywhere?
No timber.
Okay. All right. Now, for what drew the family here? Were they a lot? Obviously, everybody in Iowa, except people who came thousands of years ago, is an immigrant. All of us. I was born in Davenport. My family came from Sweden, and they walked when they got to Chicago down to Galesburg, and ended up in the Quad City area. So, how did your family get here?
This family came from Pennsylvania in the lowest tier of counties. At that time, it was Bedford County, which was a huge county, and it later, in 1850, became Fulton County. But they moved from Fulton County in 1846, came on a wagon train, I believe, with a number of other people from that area who came to this section of Iowa. The Green family, which lived east of the Worley farm, they came, and I think two of the descendants, sisters, wrote about that trip by that family, or that on that wagon train, and they started early in spring, and they didn't get here until early winter, and it was a hard trip with lots of flooding and rivers to ford. And by today's roads, it was 846 miles. So traveling by wagon train, and I'm not sure how many miles they might make in a day, 20 miles maybe, or maybe a little bit more depending on the conditions. It would have taken them a number of days, and then depending on what the situation was along the way, more days. So they came in 1846, and Samuel Charlton came with his 5 children. His wife had died in 1839, so her gravesite is back in Pennsylvania and no longer being able to be found because the tombstones in that era were made of limestone, and the engraving on them has disintegrated to the point that you wouldn't even know, who they are. And so we have Samuel Charlton buried a quarter of a mile east of the farm, along with 17 other family members who are buried there. So he's buried there with 3 of his children. There were 5 children who came with him. His oldest son, John, who was our second great-grandfather, his sister, Nancy Jane Charlton, who died when she was only 30 and a half years old from a rattlesnake bite. I assume it was a prairie rattler. She'd only been married a year and a half. And it's an interesting story. Her husband remarried, and in that second marriage, they didn't have any children, but in the second marriage, he had like a large family, 10, 11 kids. And the first child was a daughter, and they named it after his first wife, Nancy Jane. And so that was kind of interesting. And then another daughter, another sister of his, Margaret Charlton Garmo. She's also buried there with her husband. And the other 2, one went to Richland, and he was Samuel Charlton also, but junior. And the other one, Elizabeth Charlton Green, was a relative of Jim Stoner, an ancestor of Jim Stoner's. And in fact, we're double cousins because we're related both on my mother's side, the Swedish side. Our grandmothers are sisters, and on my father's side, the Charlton side. So that's kind of the story of them getting here to Iowa.
How they got here. Well, it's certainly true that it wasn't as fast. We've learned about some of the roads. Highway 34 that we take for granted was plowed with oxen about a 7-mile swath from directly east of here to what's now Fairfield, because it was so hard to get to market at all. And that was in the late 1830s. And it was by a man named Mr. Parsons. He had nothing to do with the college. That began in 1875. But he just got fed up with the difficulty of getting to Fairfield. And so he carved his own way. And it's really almost identical if you take a look at imposing the map on the other, that it's really Highway 34. So we should tip our hat to Mr. Parsons.
Is that Parsonsville was named
yes.
after that family?
Yes. Now I have to give credit to this family for being organized. I don't know if this shows up on camera. I know that Sandy Glaspie, who's our monthly art consultant, able to put our displays together, and this is up on 3rd floor. This is as chock full a display as I've seen, and it all makes sense. There's a sequence to it, and do you mind talking about how you came to put this together?
Well, I've been doing genealogy since maybe 2010, and this was the first family ancestry that I worked on. And so I had most of that information, but I work with a desktop publishing program called Affinity Publisher. And I pulled information from my genealogy and maps from the Jefferson County Gen Web. .com or whatever it is, .org.
Yeah, Iowa Gen Web or IA Gen Web.
And the Jefferson County Gen Web is superb, and of all of the ones I've seen around the country, it is so chock full of information that you can go back and find great information about schools and churches and like an 1871 ownership of the farmland all over the county, and it's got them all penciled in. So that was a great help to be able to see exactly where the Garmo farm was, and it ended up being started as 65 acres and I think grew to 96, and then actually it's 196 acres that the family owns. It's close to 200. So that's where I gained that information, and also was able to get the abstract that Larry had, and was able to figure out all of the owners of the land for the section 3, 4, 8 and 9 and 10 that are part of the family farm. And so with that, I found out all of the people who owned the land, and it was the Garmo, Workman, Charlton, Worley families that have owned parcels of that land.
You know that IA GenWeb is part of, there have 99 county projects, because the whole state of Iowa has, 99 counties, and each one is as chock full as we've just heard. You can find for Jefferson County records from the first general store ever. It was from 1839 and 1840. It tells you what people bought, who owed what and hadn't paid up yet, and every single transaction. The store owner was Ebenezer Gage, G-A-G-E. And so the record keeping is just impeccable. It's thorough. It's kind of fun to look sometimes. You'd be surprised at what you find. Yes.
Where was that store that you're talking about? Where was it located?
Well, Fairfield in 1839 was set up just as a center core of 3 blocks on either side of what we would call the Central Park, but it wasn't a square. It was actually an oval. If you go downstairs, you can see some pictures that show they were ovals, and in fact, there were horse watering stations. There were places to hitch your horses, and there weren't any sidewalks, wood or otherwise, anywhere nearby, and it became an issue for all the store owners of what was being tracked in. So they brought those things up to the county council and everybody else. And all that's in there. You can find all those stories in there. So it wasn't far away.
The nice thing also is they have the mid-decade census records.
Yes.
For the, I think, maybe 1885, 1895, 1905, 1915, 1925. Not sure if it goes to 35, but I know at least 25. And so those are really interesting things because people do move, in between those 10 years times. And so you can spot where people were, and you can actually see the census record and see who the family members were, in that family. And early on in the census records, you only had hash marks with how many people were within certain age brackets, or whether they were male or female, how many males, how many females. And then it finally got to where they actually named the persons besides the homeowner, the head of the household.
Well, can we learn a little bit about anybody's experience or recollections of, your forebears' experience on the property, on your farm? Any stories about the land itself, visitors expected or unexpected? You mentioned something about the 1930s. It's often remembered that was a terrible time for chinch bugs here in Iowa. Was that ever spoken about, Larry?
Don't remember that.
Okay, no?
I think our early experiences before we actually went to the Charlton Worley farm, because our father rented a farm for a few years after he got out of the Army, and then moved to a farm east of Salina in 1950. It was just before I entered kindergarten, because I remember walking on the mud road to school in Salina. And since we've had a dry year, I think the situation of the drought came into play when we were at that farm, because one year it was so dry, the pastures dried up, and we were herding the cattle down the roadsides, eating grass from the road. And I remember Dad parked the car at the end of our property, and I sat in the car reading a book till the cattle got down to the car, and then I had to turn them around and send them back the other way. So, and
I was the other end of the farm, so we keep the cattle in the road.
there was also the time that a lot of the corn didn't grow because it was drought, and we had to go out with our carpenter's apron with shelled corn in our pockets and our hose, and we replanted corn. And so our grandfather, Worley, and my dad and Larry and I were out there planting corn by hand with the hoe.
And what month would that have been that you replanted?
Well, I suppose it was in June, you think? June, July, somewhere in there, but school wasn't in session at that time, so.
Well, we do know that the Dust Bowl, famously, infamously around the United States, didn't hit here, but chinch bugs did. And if anybody here has stories that have come down through your family about entire loss of a crop year and a half crop loss in another year, adjoining years, made the 30s particularly challenging, even though there wasn't any Dust Bowl activity in Jefferson County. Well, where was the nearest school for all of the kids in the family?
Well, Larry?
One with fun or?
No, here there by the farm.
Yeah, the school's about 2 miles from the house. We either rode a bicycle or walked.
Did they have a horse-drawn bus at any point? The reason I ask isn't actually in jest, because there have been people up here who've talked about riding the horse-drawn bus
So we were in school in the 50s, so.
when they had combustion engines. Yep.
And when we moved in 56, that was the year I was in 6th grade, so our township, at that time, Buchanan Township sent the kids to junior high, but not in the rest of the townships. So there was one more year. Larry he was 1 year younger than I, and he spent one more year at the country school at Buchanan number 1, and it closed in 57. Yeah. But all of our other family members did attend school there from way back in the years. And there was also a Methodist church at the end of the road heading east from our farm, and I think it went defunct in 1937, but that was a church that many of the people in the neighborhood and our relatives attended that church also. Now, Larry and I had only lived on the farm from him 5th grade, me 6th grade, but Marcia, our sister, lived there her whole life because she was born
I was born there.
On the farm?
In the hospital, but
Yes. Okay.
that's the only place I grew up, was on the farm.
So she spent
The only farm until I
Yeah.
was out of high school.
And when did you go to high school? You don't mind saying? I'm older than you, so it's all
Oh, well, I was born in 57.
okay.
So.
And so that was right after, it was 59 by the state law that everybody had to start busing people in. But it looks like in this county it happened gradually, starting a little sooner in your case, and everybody by 59. So, well, what memories of the place especially?
Just the animals and helping outside with the animals and the gardening, and that's
Favorite
talk about
chores? Yeah.
and because of the age difference, it was like the neighborhoods out there seemed to be a going thing with 2 generations, where we always had somebody to play with.
Well,
So,
it just
but
happened
Brian-
that something was in the water, the women said that year, that here were the 2 older children in all of these families, and then along came, 10, 12 years later, came the second set of
Jane
children.
was a senior in high school when I was starting kindergarten, so.
And kindergarten
To
that
put it
year
in
was at
perspective.
Fairfield High School because they were so full that year that only one class, her class, was in the basement at Fairfield High School. So she rode the bus with me, and I took her to her classroom
Fantastic.
in the basement, and
And the
I was a senior
same
in high
with
school and
Larry
went to my class.
and Sandy. younger sister.
Well, so we take care of everybody. And it's good, big and little. Was she nice?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. This, it's on camera, but you can say whatever
okay.
you feel like. Okay.
Okay.
Right. Very good.
So we one of the stories we have to tell is that we were so gung-ho to have a horse that we had a calf from a milk cow that was tamed, and we'd have it tied up to the fence and pet it and that. And when it got a little bit bigger, we decided we'd try sitting on it. And pretty soon we found in an shed an old saddle, and the saddle kind of had leather pieces that were falling apart, but my dad fixed the saddle up. We put the saddle on that calf, and we rode that calf. And I'm sure the neighbors gave my dad lots of fleck over, your kids have to ride a cow, you can't even have a horse. So that was earlier the same year. And then at Christmas time, well, early December, he said, get in the car, come with me, we're going someplace. And went to a farm where there were some horses, and we got to pick out a 3-year-old horse. And that horse lived a long life at our farm. We had the grand times with it. Of course, once we got the horse, we both had something to ride, and so either bareback or saddle. But we had a grand time with the horse, and
Jane had me in the saddle with her
All right.
when I was a baby. So
And what was the horse's name?
horse's name was Tony, evidently.
And the cow's name?
Tom Mix was a
Oh, yeah.
cowboy star,
Yeah.
and he had a horse named Tony. And so my
Okay.
dad gave us that
And you
idea
named
to
the cow, too.
name it Tony. And then the cow's name was Cicero. But,
Very-
you
I
know,
didn't
on
know
farms, you kids had fun with the animals, so.
So-
Yeah.
All the Latin scholars would be very proud that you named that cow Cicero. That's great. Well, the Methodist Church did it. You said it was there for a lot of the families, but it's no longer.
Right.
Did you go to that same Sunday school? Or
Not out in the country, but
Okay.
in town.
in town at the Methodist Church also? Okay.
So the farmhouse that was built in 1900 by Scott Charlton, who was our great-grandfather, and his wife, and our grandmother and her siblings grew up there, and she and her husband, Roy Worley, took over the farm after her father, Scott Charlton, died in 1925. And it's said that house came by train and was a Sears Roebuck kit house. Now, I did some research looking up of information about it. It didn't seem that they had kits in 1900, but there might have been some forebearers or forerunners before that became known as a kit. But that house was the same image as one our cousin Ron Deal lives in now. The floor plan, Melvin Deal lives in now. And they have the same story, so I'm assuming that at least it came by rail to Purley. And from there, it's a kit house, so be it.
All right. Well, we know that Loudon did the same thing with barns. There was a catalog, and you could order not just the pulley system, not just the milking stations. You could order the whole thing out of the catalog, and that's what Loudon liked. And they invented everything, and they fit them all together. And so rather than assembling pieces that might not work, just get the whole thing from the Loudons.
That 1900 house was taken down in 2020. It was beyond repair. It didn't have a good foundation. When my parents last lived there, they were painting one side of the house every summer because the wood just wasn't holding paint anymore. And it was a big job, scraping and trying to get paint on the house. So it was beyond repair and time to go. That was kind of a sad time. They were there to see it go, but I couldn't quite bear to be there.
Oh, a big loss. What do you remember? You can tell, this is your time to tell any thing you remember about them on a holiday or on a birthday?
We always had cousins and big family get-togethers. It seemed like always at the farm, more than anywhere else, because we had the horse to ride and farm animals that the others maybe didn't have. I don't.
And which holidays would stand out for that?
Oh, it was summertime mostly. 4th of July
4th of
maybe.
July?
I think Mom and Dad the community had parties, little parties that they got together for hobo parties.
There was
That year, Mom was pregnant and Sandy was born.
a ladies' club, Richwood Willing Workers, and
That too.
and they did chivalries for the kids and the families, and the parents would put on skits, and the men would dress as the bride and that sort of thing, and they had a hobo party in June out in the field east of the cemetery.
It was September.
Oh,
September.
September, right. And later that evening, after we were there with the bales of hay, eating mulligan stew and that sort of thing, my mother was pregnant with our youngest sister, and she went to the hospital later that night. So everybody was calling her the little hobo, of the neighborhood because of her going to the hospital that night.
That's a great memory.
When we moved from the Larson farm, which was east of Salina, to the Worley farm in 1956, there was no indoor plumbing. We had a cistern behind the house and a pump, and you'd go out and get the water to drink and bring it in. And we'd take baths in the wash tub, brought into the kitchen, Saturday night. Otherwise, you did pan bathing, and the dad had a pond built, I think, in 56, 57. He must have started it then, so it took a while for it to fill with water so we could have indoor plumbing, but took the old entryway to the back of the house and turned it into a bathroom, and the pantry floor was cut out and steps put down in, and they dug out the cellar to make a bigger basement area so there could be a washer and dryer there, and freezer and the shelves for canned goods and a shower, and also a sink with water, and of course the water heater, and that was there. And I remember washing eggs at that sink for 6 months to earn $20 to buy the first miniature transistor radio. But we did the outdoor toilet for a number of years, and of course we grew up with that at the other farm, so you were used to it. But
And I have that flooring as a tabletop
You do.
with a sewing machine.
Fantastic.
yeah, the floor of the
The pantry.
pantry became a tabletop for her.
Waste not, want not. You keep using it. That's great.
On top of a Singer sewing machine base, so it's really neat.
Question.
Why was the floor of the pantry so attractive? What is it, like just rough wood, or what does it look like?
It's all little wide, about 2-inch wide boards that are all put together in like your wood flooring.
Yeah.
Nice hardwood floor.
Really hard wood flooring. Of course, they had the house had outside to the basement was, you had to go out on the porch to open the door to go down the steps, and then those got bad, and they added the stairway to the basement
That's really
in the
Inside
pantry.
the house through the pantry, and then an outdoor entrance into that space that led down to the basement and into the kitchen.
Now, you mentioned that house. It sounds like it already had electricity with all the appliances you're mentioning.
Yeah, it did have electricity.
But the house you came from, I guess.
Electricity up to a certain, I remember when I was 5 years old, I still remember we had lanterns, but we did get electricity later. And my dad, after he got home from the Army, went to a wiring school, and that was the push for rural electrification at that time. And so he went to school with Merle Beagle, who lived further north and northeast of us. And the two of them together did wiring. I don't know if they wired houses or barns or what they wired, but he did work doing wiring for a period of time. And then he, bought land and farmed at it was a Reeder Farm at that time they called it, and that was off of the Germanville Road at the end of the Salina Road where it tees into Germanville Road. The first road that turns east, that corner was the farm, and he rented the farm at that time.
The Electrification Act officially passed Congress in 1936, way before World War II, but the war came, and all the copper was needed for other purposes. And Iowa was among the later states to be able to get rural electrification in areas like ours. So I'm not surprised that it was a skill that came on after World War II, and that several houses, a lot of them in rural Jefferson County and around, got the electricity later.
And we also lived in the Larson Farm. It was a mud road. And I walked to school when I was in kindergarten, and one spring walking home, I got stuck in the mud out in front of the neighbor's farm just west of us. And of course, my boots stuck in there, and I didn't know what to do. I'm a little kid, so I just stood there. And wouldn't you know, over the hill came my father looking for me, and he was my savior. He pulled me out and carried me home. But the next year, we did get gravel road, and they graded the road and put gravel on it. And our mother said, "Don't go riding your bikes out on the gravel road." Well, you got to find out what it's like. So we did, and on my way turning back in, slid and scratched up my whole side. So, okay, do what mother says. I learned my lesson from that one.
Fair enough. Well, it certainly is true now. If you've seen B roads are the ones that are untreated altogether. So that's just Mother Earth right there, And then the gravel, and then the blacktop. Salina blacktop. Does anybody know when it was actually blacktopped? It's been called that as long as I've ever heard, but somebody must know the year it got paved. Anybody?
Pleasant Plain Road, I was thinking they come by our place, and I was 7 or 8 years old, something like early to mid 50s, somewhere in there.
Okay.
So that Pleasant Plain Road is blacktop, I think, out to Buchanan too there. So.
Okay. Interestingly, downstairs we got maps, one 1845. We got another one 1876 and another one 1945. And in the 1945 map, they still call what's now Pleasant Plain Road for us. They call it Salina Road from the very beginning as you come around the cemetery. But nowadays we just call it, off of Pleasant Plain Road heading east and north.
Because Salina Road probably was more prominent at that time, that Pleasant Plain Road was not a direct road at that time, just guessing.
Yeah, hard to know. Homework for us. I'll try to do some homework on that. Well, was Halloween a big deal? You hear all the stories about...
I know Mom made costumes for my sister and I.
What were your costumes?
Talk about Salina. Salina.
Any memories of Halloween?
I remember Mom making a tail for one of them. I must have been a cat.
All right.
When we went to the Salina country school, we would have Halloween evening, and the people in the town all knew that the kids were going to come trick-or-treating. Of course, there were only maybe 25 at the most with kids from kindergarten through 8th grade. And so we go around trick-and-treating in the neighborhood, and then we'd walk to the school, which was close to Salina, just north of town. And we'd have a party there, and the parents would help set up the party, and we'd, bob for apples, do that usual thing. And So that was interesting for us as a community doing that. Different than what kids do in school these days. I was an elementary teacher for second and third grade, and so we'd have the Halloween party in the classroom, and parade around the school grounds, and the parents would come and watch, and we'd have a party in the classroom at the end of the day. But
Where did you teach?
I taught in Cedar Rapids.
Okay. All right. Well, people do talk about the one-room schools as having been really just community centers, that everything was gathered there and all the generations were together, just as in the classroom, the big kids and little kids were all together.
Well, they were, and the community supported the school. I know, parents would be on the, trustees, or I forget what they called it. School board. And I remember my dad was on one time, and they went in and sanded and polished and stained and sealed the wood floor of the school. This was in Salina. And took care of hiring the teachers and firing the teachers.
Did both happen?
Well, it did at the Buchanan #1 school. You remember that, Marvin?
Got to hear it.
I was thinking the name of the people in charge were directors.
Directors.
Directors, okay.
And then what was you talking
Oh, the teacher that was dismissed when you were in school, when we arrived. Yeah. Yeah, don't say the name.
You don't have, names can be changed to protect the guilty, that's all right. So, can at least, it's too juicy, we gotta hear a little bit about this. What happened? I know the expectations were extremely high for school teachers in those days.
There
And
was just a lot to handle with
yeah,
the number of students, and the teacher was probably over her head with what she needed to do, but that, I think, that year she had taught one group of students 2 years in one, they took 2 grades in 1 year.
Yeah, I know my sister and
Mary Carroll,
Yeah,
Schaefer Fish, yeah.
there wasn't enough in one class, so they combined.
Oh,
2
that
grades.
was what they did. They were advanced, right?
Yeah.
okay, no further questions, Your Honor. Okay, we're not gonna pry any more than that. Well, if you get a chance to see the display case, it's a work of art. Let's give Sandy Gillespie a hand. And 2, assisted in fantastic measure by these folks. So our hats are off to you for organizing things. Can you walk us through any of these items that there's this quilt up there made by, who's?
Oh,
yeah.
I made the quilt in 2011 after I had started genealogy on this family, and it just, I was, I guess, impelled within me to do something to honor the farm, so I made the quilt, and I listed all the animals and the crops that were grown there, and the people who lived there, and a photo of my grandfather, Roy Worley, and his daughter, Catherine Worley Booth. They had a team of horses with a wagon and with the bang board, the board on the side of it. When you pick corn by hand, you'd throw it in. In fact, when Dad would open the cornfields, they'd trample down the first few rows of corn, and when we got home from school in October, we'd go out and pick up the ears of corn and toss them in the wagon with the bang board on it. And so that photo's on the quilt, and a picture of my dad with a team of horses with a rake between them, and they're gathering the loose hay up. And I think I have a photo of a scene where they're putting the loose hay up into the hay mow. I don't know if they had horses pulling the rope to pull it up, but I know I drove the tractor on the rope pulling the hay up into the bales of hay up into the hay mow.
It's a beautiful quilt. Oh,
So it has, just photos of things like that. And Dad took some pigs to the state fair, and that's a picture on the quilt too. So it was a labor of love and a remembrance for the farm, and hopefully it'll stay in the family for a long time.
Now there's a picture of a horse that won an award at the Oregon State Fair. How did that? It's a long time ago. It's a century and.
Do you want to tell the story of that? Okay. Willis Worley, the father of Roy Worley, moved from Illinois to Iowa for a short period of time, and that's how my grandfather Roy Worley met my grandmother Florence Charlton. And in 1919, they took a Percheron stallion, 4-year-old, to the Oregon State Fair, and it was in November. They went by railroad car. And I happened to find online the winners of the people of that class at the fair, and they were not one of them. But they have a medallion that has a Percheron head of it, and it says W.E. Worley and Son, and Prince was the name of that stallion. And it was very interesting because I had some coins. I went to a coin shop in Marion, where I live, and the coin dealer, I had that coin and that medallion and showed it to him, and he says, well, I've seen one just like that. And he turned it over and he says, and it has the same names on it. But it was 1921 Missouri State Fair, and it was first prize. So I asked him if he could find that and show it to me, because he said he had it at home. And I gave him my phone number, but he never called me. Now I asked him, would you be willing to do a trade, He said no. He says he'd have to have some money for it, and I asked how much. He said $300. And I thought, well, there's no way I'm paying $300 for something like that, but I thought if he'd bring it, at least I could get a picture of it. Well, he never, called back, and he's, his shop isn't there anymore. So I have the story at least, so, I have the pleasure of knowing that.
Fair enough. Questions? Some of you are in this family, and this is your chance for rebuttal, not really. But just, if you know any stories that add to what we've been hearing here, any questions?
Well, I think we should say that Kent Worley, raise your hand, Kent, is Larry's son, and he's farming the land and also renting land across the road from Marvin and Mary, and hoping that he'll continue the line of farmers in the family with some sons who maybe someday will be interested too.
And that always is a question of how many layers, how many generations. So if we go back to the 1857 and count forward to now, who are these little guys?
Let's see. So second grandfather, first grandfather, father, brother, son, and their children. That makes 7 generations.
Okay, guys. It's an opportunity. We'll see what goes. We don't ever try to tell people what to do, but we're delighted, when people appreciate what we have.
What do you mean when you say second grandfather and first grandfather? I haven't heard that before.
Grandfather, great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather. That's what I'm doing. This 2 greats, 1 great, great. Great, second great, third great.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't heard it phrased that way before. Thank you.
Often in genealogy, people do G grandfather and GG grandfather, GGG grandfather. So it's,
Okay.
And
what? Is it a bang board because that's the noise it makes? I'm not
it's
a farmer.
just strip of wood with prongs that hooked onto the side of the wagon, so the corn would bang against that board and drop down into the wagon. So
Okay.
I don't know.
Makes
Was
sense
it
to
called
me.
something else? Anybody else know what it was called?
Bangboard?
We called it bang board.
In basketball, use a glass, and corn.
It's higher on one side of the wagon.
Yeah.
It wouldn't fly over the-
It's just on one side of the wagon, and you were on the other
Oh.
side, and you threw it. When you
Okay.
threw it, you didn't want to go over to the other side, so it would bounce back into the wagon.
I got
It's
it.
a great name.
Thanks for asking that question, because
that's
it
a very
probably
good
wouldn't
one.
make
In
any
the
sense.
old days, I mean, when they first were doing that, before they had the pickers, that's the way they did the whole place. Was
Yeah.
by hand.
Yeah.
Throw each year into the wagon, you know, so give, what was it, 50 bushel a day or something like that.
Wow.
I
And
think they even had contests to see who could do more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Today.
And
I'd
I
like to
remember
mention-
making corn shucks, stacking them together and tying them. What was that all about? I just remember we dug holes in them and pretended they were teepees, but
Oh, was that from shelling it out, shelling the crib out? They had a stack of huts.
no, this is stalks of corn that were
Yeah.
that were
Well, they chopped it, some of it.
shocked, yeah. And then oats being shocked too,
Right.
because then they put them in the threshing machine.
We run the stalks and corn through the hammer mill to feed the cattle.
They put an insulage up that way too in silos and chop them, send it right up.
We've got footage in the Fairfield History Series films, the documentary series, of a broadcast from WHO radio of the corn shucking championships in 1940, I believe is the year, and it was done right here in Jefferson County. And the only phone that was operating at that moment, that the DJ, the head commentator was able to use, was in the Switzer farm off Salina. So, and we've got that on film in our third film called A Place to Grow, which is all about agriculture here in Jefferson County, all the way back to Native American centuries up to now. And
I got a little strap at home and it's got a hook on it.
I was going to say, that was a... No, can you explain that to everybody? Go ahead.
So that you could get the ear yanked out of this husk. So
Oh, I've seen that.
Uh,
I wanted to also say, Marvin Larson is here, and his parents lived on the farm across the road from ours, and he lives there now. And we had lots of fun as kids together. We'd go fishing at their pond or our pond, and we'd catch lots of bluegill, and we'd beg our parents, can we have a fish fry tonight? And yeah, if you clean the fish. And so we'd either be at their place or our place eating fish. And also we mowed the cemetery together. And here we are I had these sheep shears trimming grass around the tombstones. Oh my gosh, the blisters on the hands, yeah.
they used to have flags we put out at Memorial Day.
Yeah. And so we did that when we were in, junior high and high school probably.
Or
Earned a little money.
And I remember it was $65 a year.
Is that it?
You can spread that out.
Yeah, 25 cents an hour. We didn't make much. I can't even remember what we got, a few dollars.
Thank you, Marvin.
You mentioned,
Yeah, go ahead.
we
I
mentioned
heard
cattle,
some
but
stories from my childhood on the farm. My dad told me that before they had machinery, they had teams of horses. And I remember that, I particularly remember that in the wintertime, they just let the horses out. They always were in the pasture where the pond was. And they just took care of themselves. There was no barn to put them in. They just stayed out. And then I remember him telling me that when he sowed oats, he had a bag that went over his shoulder, and then he just sowed them. We would never think of sowing oats today, just throwing them out in the field. I remember those two things really well. They didn't, Larry has a tractor in his barn. That's his grandfather's.
It's awesome, and my father's boat.
What year is it? Is it a deer? I noticed this is a deer family. We always ask.
What year was it?
What year is,
1948?
No, it's 30,
B.
late 30.
All right,
B. John Deere.
fantastic.
When my grandfather left the farm after our grandmother had died a few years earlier, oh, no, that year, shortly after she died, he left the farm. And he gave the tractor to Larry, and I got the player piano that they had sitting in the front room for many, many years. I don't have it anymore, but yeah. So that's a keepsake.
Yeah,
My grandfather, he sold insurance for Jefferson County Mutual, and my dad did after he passed away. My dad sold insurance.
but you're keeping that tractor, right? That's good.
Well, it's kind of like when you have a small family farm, you have to have a job in town to support the farm. So Larry's job was,
Oh, for the phone company for 4 to 6 years and farming.
We've got an exhibit downstairs, the Fairfield Phone Company's original switchboard, if you'd like to see it. If you ever aspired to know everything that happened in the entire town on any given day, you just apply for that job. It's good. There were single row harvesters back then. Did you ever use one?
We had the woods.
Yep. So you can imagine now, one row.
Then we had a 2-row John Deere picker on a 50 John Deere for a lot of years.
And think how long it would take, to harvest the fields that we see nowadays. It's pretty amazing, the progress and the size of things.
I was just going to mention there were more than just cattle. When I was growing up there, we had lambs or sheep, we had hogs and chickens and baby chickens, lots of cats and dogs and
and a big garden.
And a
I was
huge
going to ask about the
garden.
garden because that wasn't mentioned so far. What were the jobs of the kids, of both generations of kids, if I may say it that way?
Lima beans, snapping beans,
Oh,
peas.
often Mother would be out before the sun was up, you'd think, either harvesting a certain number of chickens for that morning and picking vegetables. But then our jobs were to shell the peas or snap the green beans and pluck the feathers from the chickens and cut apart the chickens and bag them for the freezer and that sort of thing.
Help Dad hold the little pigs. That wasn't much fun. That lasted about a couple, and that was it for me.
Neutering the pigs, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I do remember the lamb's tails getting cut, bottle feeding animals, taking care of them when they were motherless.
Yeah.
That's part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And 4-H, we were in 4-H and had steers, Angus steers to show, and girls 4-H, I was in that too, and we'd take things to county fair. County fair was always a big thing. It was fun having our items judged at the fair and doing demonstrations and showing the animals in the ring and selling them, hoping that you made some money on them and training the steers to not run away with you.
Iowa Public Television is going to be showing August 1st and 2nd a 2-part series about the state fair. We know that the very first and second state fairs in the state of Iowa were here in Fairfield. And last year, fortunately, Mark Schaefer, our late director, was interviewed by the people who made the films that will show on August 1st and 2nd. And they'll be showing here in town, certainly, and we're going to try to get our own tapes of them and take another look at them later if anybody misses the broadcast. But it'll be August 1st and 2nd, and it'll be about the history of the State Fair in Iowa.
What years were the State Fair here?
1854 and 1855.
Okay. Well, I have a story. Third great grandfather, Jacob Herring, who's also buried at the cemetery near the farm, took his cotton socks that he had made to the fair and won a prize, something like 50 cents for his socks that he had made.
The locals won big time in those first 2 years because a lot of people didn't come from as far away, but it was still quality any year. And Jefferson County really cleaned up, though, when it came to those two first state fairs. A lot of the awards, the prizes, there was a women's equestrian event that's talked about in the third film, in the A Place to Grow film, but also Mark gets to talk about in the show that you'll get to see on August 1st and 2nd.
Is that stone on 4th Street?
It was, that stone is still there on 4th Street. If you've been to like My Lucky Day, that it's right there. That's commemorating the 1854 very first day fair. It really was pretty much, that was the western boundary of the property that was set up for the state fair.
The southwest corner.
Yes.
That went across the railroad tracks. Where the railroad tracks is now, that was part of the state fair, that lot.
And
the big Harper Brush, used to be Harper Brush building, that was part of the state fair grounds.
And they didn't lose money, they made money. It was in the single digits, but they made money. So we'll be learning about that when Mark gets to talk on in that film. We want to thank the family. Let's thank the Worley for
And the family in the last row, could you stand up so people know that you're here? There, Larry's 3 sons, Kent and Sean and Scott Worley, and their wives and Chip and Cleveland.
And please, if you are inclined, be sure to go up. It doesn't have to be right now, but be sure to get a chance in this month to see this wonderful exhibit upstairs. A lot of the things you've heard stories about just now, you'll see some mementos from those up there. And next month we'll have another event. We know that we're going to have great weather. Also on August 10th, there's going to be a special event out in the street in front of the museum that everybody's invited to. It's after hours. It's business after hours. We're going to have a special celebration, and in fact, we'll be talking a little bit about those first 2 state fairs, but mostly people are going to be enjoying things like watermelon grown locally and other events that are just for the fun of it in the summer here at the museum. So please do come by if you can, and please do see the wonderful exhibit upstairs. Thanks a lot for coming, and thanks to the Worleys. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Marsha.